Okay, so if you guys mind, have a seat there again. We're going to go ahead and go to the part of the program where we do a panel session. This is the part where you guys are welcome to have questions, and you can address it to either an individual person, or you can have it, be answered by a few people. Sometimes it's always good for discussion. We're going to go ahead and go through this. I've asked Darren to step in and be part of this as well. This talk is about telomeres. He'll be presenting that after. And we have one more speaker after that. He Josh. So two more speakers, and we'll just go ahead and we're going to open this up for questions here. So if you guys maybe just want to put your hand up, and I'm just going to speak up loudly and hear from around here.
I can talk loudly. This question is targeted toward Kenneth. Talking about genetic modifications and removing problems effectively. How do you balance that off with the trade-offs for things like sickle cell anemia, which something that shows up over a long period of time? We take a trade-off now. How do we know that's not going to give us a trade-off benefit later on down the line?
Okay, so I think the actual term for that is I think the actual term for that is norm of reaction, where we map a gene to a phenotype, and then the phenotype can exist within a range. That's actually a very hard problem in genetics, and in the end, what the deal is done basically piece by piece, where you do study after study that lets you carefully establish what the total range of possibilities for the phenotype is. For something as specific as sickle cell anemia, I don't know. What I would prefer is basically you work on things that you know first, and then you move on from there. It's true that there are things that might enact in the long term, and this is difficult work, but I do think that there's some low-hanging fruit to be had when it comes to at least getting rid of that kind of mutation. An obvious one again is just dwarfism. Not that I have anything against dwarfs, but it's more just that that's an easy one because it's one gene, easy, and it's very easy to display. Those are the ones I would want to change first.
Oh, any other questions?
Okay. So I have a question for Luke. I was a bit curious. What is it about having a life purpose that extends a life? Do people take care of themselves better? Do they eat better? Or is it just a psychological thing where they decide to live longer and then as a result actually live longer?
You guys might have seen the sign people have that says something like, "I'm so far behind on my to-do list that I can never die." I think there's almost something to that. It's a physiological mechanism. A body is a little bit different than a mechanical thing like a car. You guys remember the Herbie movies? And Herbie kind of had a soul in a physical car. And so he could do things that would kind of stretch for him. He's almost out of energy. You just give it that little bit of extra. And I feel like the physiology has that same sort of thing. You have physiologic reserve. You talk about somebody in a stressful situation, a car's crushing your kid, and they go over and they pick it up and they get the kid out. They couldn't do that on a normal day. But obviously they can do it because that's there. Physiologic reserve is there. And I think that same thing can apply to longevity. If you don't have any reason why you need to keep living, it's that much harder to keep going. And if you do have a reason, it's something that can push you to go that extra way.
Comment on that too, actually. I'm trying to remember the name of the book they're quoting this from, but they did do a study, and when this one fellow found that in North America is a very strong correlation between degeneration and retirement. A lot of people seem to start fading after they're told by society that they're no longer necessary. And of course, we tend to be a little bit more dissociative with our elderly in this culture and all this kind of stuff that doesn't have them integrated in the family, and having them as part of a purposeful organization the way the Blue Zone does. So that's another kind of missing piece where that life purpose is just intertwined in there and just works with the stuff that Luke's talking about.
I have a question about blue zones. I've never seen them on the map like that. The thing that jumped out at me is that they're all close to the equator. Has anyone looked at that aspect of it?
I guess that's something I also just noticed too. I don't think they have a specific reason, but perhaps like diet and food, fruits and vegetables, fresh fruits and vegetables are more available in those regions. And they also emphasize that it was dry, but more so that it was sunny. So maybe vitamin D helps as well. But yeah, just lots of speculation and stuff.
Are those cultures?
It's a cultural thing, it's a family thing too, it's
A lot of them are Mediterranean climate. I mean, California, the actual Mediterranean ones. I think it has to do partly with the ability to be active outside. You look at the health disparity between British Columbia and the cold parts of Canada, and you can see an actual trend there as well, of how active people are, especially in the winter months.
Are those parts of the world where humans have lived for longer periods of time?
Civilization? Absolutely. And another thing I'd add to that is there's that consistent timeline. Right? It's easy to get out of bed every day at 6 in the morning, and that's when the sun gets up for your entire lifetime.
Right.
Right? So that generation of habit and that sort of thing. Versus, getting out of bed in the midwinter, February downpour, plus, it doesn't even get sunny till 8:30.
And I'll add a small bit to that about circadian rhythms, which we've just started looking at, is us staying late at night because we have lights, including our computer screens. Just in the last couple of years, the worst thing for us, affects our metabolism, more fat. We should be living sunrise and sunset in the big picture. Less fat gain, longer lifespan on that.
Can I mention something on that? There's a program you can get, it's just a little game on that, it's called F-Lux.
Yep.
And it will slowly dim the blue out of your screen as the sun is supposed to, and so
Yeah, so it is the blue wave, specific from our newer screens since about 1995, that inhibits our melatonin, therefore makes it easier for us to stay up late. And if you can just change that, lots of effect. Get out there in the morning, get sunlight early. The amount of light even in the cloudy Vancouver is a lot. Get early light, get lots of light.
Or those light books wake you up.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a longevity topic, but you guys have seen these studies recently. They found a new reason why there's so much nearsightedness. The genes haven't changed enough that in 100 years we went from 10% of people were nearsighted to like 90% of kids in some areas now. And there's always they're reading too much on close, like that. But the studies they found is that it's actually spending at least 3 hours a day getting bright light at the level of sitting under a tree on a cloudy day was enough to prevent 90% of nearsightedness. So maybe we have a natural environment and maybe push ourselves back out there somehow.
I had a question for Ward. You had mentioned that animal proteins were kind of a little bit harmful, but I remember seeing the graphics where specifically like chicken and fish, but I assume that you meant all animal proteins.
Yes, and as a neuroscientist, I know fish is very good for our brain.
Yeah.
So, in general, I would encourage people to eat the fish compared to any other ones. But for pure longevity, it seems like animal proteins in general have the high methionine is detrimental. And again, you don't have to be 100% one thing or the other. But if I could eat one animal-based product, I would say fish is the one to go for if I had a choice.
So like mostly vegetarian, throw some fish in there.
Yeah.
Cool.
I've got a question that I'm trying to still form in my mind here. We talked about, for example, you brought up about lifting the car off the your kid gets out of the car. I mean, we obviously have these latent abilities. The question is how do you balance off both from a longevity standpoint and just in general, being aware of what those are and dealing with the norms, our cultural norms, or societal norms of you can't do that, you're getting old, you get sick, you get decrepit, and what we actually have latent in our genetic, and bring that out. How do we go about it?
I have one little story about that.
Okay.
So about willpower. So a lot of people talk about willpower being very limited and you need sugar constantly. And there's actually quite a famous researcher that shows this, is that if I give you a hard math problem, and half of you I give sugar and half I don't, and then I offer you something else. The people that have the sugar will have more willpower and resist it. But talking about kind of the purpose in life, if you ask people ahead of time if they believe in the limitation factor, you need sugar to be able to perform, the belief that you need it or not fundamentally changed it. So if you believe you have that inner thing, in the sense that you don't always need sugar, you don't have a drop in willpower. Now, of course, you will run out of glucose and run into troubles, but you can tap into a lot of these reserves. How much of that is open to debate?
That's another thing I was going to mention when I was talking about the ODA, is the phrase, the body cannot go where the mind has not already been. And that's kind of the crux of it. For any of these things, it's like, you've got to get the mind where you want to be, and the body follows.
This is the part of why that despite my research into all the genetic stuff, I don't really buy into a too strong thesis of genetic determinism day by day. Because I know that whatever belief I have is going to be probably so wildly misled or inaccurate that I won't be able to match my belief to whatever is actually true about my genetic profile. This combined with the fact that genes can describe such a wide array of phenotypes, and all those phenotypes can interact, makes me think that it is more of a mind thing than any kind of idea of, okay, well, my sugar levels are that high or not.
And one small addition is there's more plasticity in things. Epigenetics, we modify ourselves. We're not just our genes.
Right.
We thought about it for years, but there's a lot of plasticity in us, far more than we know.
I guess the follow-up to that is how do we take better control of our epigenetics?
Have a purpose. One example. So the mind leading, right? In the sense that, okay, no, I'm not limited by the sugar. I didn't have orange juice. It's been 3 hours since I ate. I can't do a math problem. There's no way. Or, having my purpose, like there is no reason, and it's true about the retirement. Lots of studies on that.
Right.
Is if you do have a purpose, if you have a reason to live, it doesn't sound deterministic and genetic. But our mind drive gene changes when we think something, right? So it's not unlimited,
Right.
but there's more plasticity than we think.
And money mustachianism, retire when you're young, work when you're old.
And really, going back to that brain, body, and mind side of it, I relate that purpose back to all three of them, right? That life purpose is related more to the mind. But you need to give your brain and body things to do as well. And so the daily regime, the daily regimen, taking on new activities, and the way that develops kind of plasticity. And 65 is the perfect time to start karate, not finish it, right? And do a few puzzles every year. We use them for brain integration all the time. There's just all sorts of different hacks you can throw in place. And if they become part of your activity base, it's going to keep your brain just as young as your mind, so to speak, right? And it's that thing about stress, really, that I was speaking about earlier, about if you stress the system appropriately, it'll continue to develop. And that's why I think that thing at 65 happens in our culture, is because it's a little bit of a life sentence. I mean, worst case scenario, you're going to get stuck in a dimly lit room with daytime talk shows and a can of booze. That's not a plan for longevity.
Okay, so, all right, we talked about things that are not genetic determinism, but I'm going to play devil's advocate and argue for genetic determinism with this question. So I noticed the blue zones, a lot of them are island populations, so they're particular genetic populations. In Loma Linda, they're not on an island, but they're still religiously bound, and have really close communities. So how much have they determined how much it could be genetic rather than lifestyle for those blue zone populations on islands?
I think there is some link, at least on Sardinia, possibly to genetics, because they do go back a long time in a small place like that. I say Loma Linda is definitely not. I don't remember the exact racial makeup in Loma Linda. I think it was 60% Asian, 18% Hispanic. It's a melting pot, and so it's 100% the culture, the lifestyle. There's no genetic component to the whole one. I don't know what the other one is.
So I would say, in general, in science, These set studies, if we get 50% genetics for these broad things such as IQ or longevity, that's pretty good. And you can't really separate it. It isn't always, it's never nature or just nurture, it's a combo of both. Yes, you can have some benefits if you have certain gene polymorphisms, but like I say, your example one, that's a very heterogeneous population, so probably in that case a lot to do with lifestyle.
I like to say that if someone's naturally a certain way, that just means we don't know what the lever is yet. But basically, heredity is actually a measure of the things that we can explain with genetic variants over genetic and environmental variants. I suspect that once we actually get a better sense of what genes actually contribute to what development and whether or not there's an environmental way that we can change that, then it's just going to blur us to the point where it doesn't matter. But that will take a lot of time.
Any telomere questions?
I won't. Epitalon, yay or nay?
I think yay from what I've read, but I'm not really going to cover in much detail.
Okay.
But I think
Okay.
I'll answer your question. So epitalon, which is a mysterious Russian peptide, yay or nay?
Let's go with yay with a qualifier on that one and get back to me in a year on that. So.
Okay.
Similar, I think it's carcinine.
Carnitine?
I think that might be one. Yeah.
Carnosine.
Carnosine. It was apparently it was animal-based, but it, when taken in high levels, tended to add to telomere length. I hadn't actually read the things myself, but a couple of days ago, some guys were talking, and I overheard it, and I was just like, that's really fascinating. So I was actually really looking forward to see whether or not you talked about it.
I've seen that on a few lists as well, and again, I haven't experimented with that personally, so I can't give you. I'll give you an answer to the qualifying on that one as well. So.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
How are you testing? How much testing do you actually do from a telomere point of view and so on? What are you using?
Good question. I'm going to get into testing and how that works in the presentation really quickly, so I'm going to get through all my slides. In terms of the actual testing, I have not begun that yet. I've got some friends that are in the process of doing things, and I'm doing things as well that may or may not contribute to my telomere length and decreasing the amount of shortening that goes into it. There's a plan to go and get tested in a certain spot, and I'm going to kind of talk about that in the presentation. So, very much that.
I have a question for Ward. You were talking about how IGF-1, which is essentially, so Ward, you were talking about IGF-1, which is essentially a growth factor for muscles, and how that could lead to DNA damage or something. Like, it reduces longevity sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. But as a growth factor, do you think that you would observe a similar thing with BDNF, which is a brain growth factor? Does an analogous problem occur?
It's funny because I've done a lot of research in BDNF for spinal cord regeneration, and IGF-1 increases spinal cord regeneration. BDNF, in theory, increases spinal cord regeneration. BDNF actually has a lot of effect. BDNF actually reduces your appetite, but we haven't seen any evidence. Well, actually, increasing it might help because you eat less, and therefore could be calorie restricted. So yeah, different growth factors, not necessarily, but that main growth factor, the IGF-1 and growth hormone, definitely make it.
Where are the red zones? What do we know about that?
Chernobyl?
I did actually post that they had the, what do they call these? The short-term occupancy buildings down here. And the life expectancy is like 63 or something like that.
Russia?
Yeah.
Russia is really bad for males. And I would say America. Like they're like 20th on the list of longevity, even though they're the richest nation. Look at their lifestyle, the level of obesity.
So if we compare red zone characteristics to blue zone characteristics, because the blue zone, some of it seems pretty universal, like connection to family.
I haven't seen anything indirect, but I bet your common sense would give you a lot of the answers.
I have a question. Kenneth, in your talk, you made all kind of comment that prosthetic limbs are an obvious enhancement, that there are people who refuse to get into a wheelchair because they're moving to walking. Do you have any attribution to that? Or would you say that?
Well, it's a fast and loose definition of enhancement. I was just hoping to convey the intuition of what an enhancement might be. That definition will expand and change to include new objects in the future. And in the end, it comes down to the human will. It comes down to what you want and whether you can get it. I think an enhancement is anything that changes, that lets us push up beyond to the limits, and then pushes us beyond that. I don't think that prosthetics has to be enhancement for anyone if they don't want it.
So some people choose not to have the cochlear implant for hearing, and some would choose it. And a friend of mine who is in a wheelchair, he would choose an exoskeleton, but not most people would have to choose that. If we had an exoskeleton, then you could run faster. But yeah, it's an individual choice.
I have a question for Kenneth. Oh, did someone have?
Also a question for Kenneth. Again, this offhand thing that you had mentioned, Colombia, what's that about?
Liz Parrish, who could not be here, she evaded the FDA approval process by going to Colombia to get her treatment. So I would either recommend Colombia if you want to actually put some CRISPR in your body.
All right.
I'm so glad she's not here when I say that. Or you can go to, but there, if you're just thinking about your kids, there actually are, in vitro fertilization is actually, you're able to do it in many countries now, Canada included. Australia, I was aware of one of the case studies I saw, but yeah, that was why I said Colombia.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick note on that, I don't know how many of you guys have been following Liz's story. I don't know if you guys know, she was at our conference last year at an attendee. We invited her this year, she wasn't able to make it, but she hopes to come up sometime. And a few of us are going to an event in a couple of weeks, so we hope to see her in Scout.
Can you tell the story?
She is a CEO of this company, BioViva. I think I saw it in a couple of slides. And she has had a couple of genetic therapies put onto viral carriers. And like I said, she flew to South America, and doctors inject them and add them to her bloodstream. I believe one of them is to target the blood system, and the other is the muscle system to rejuvenate. And it's very experimental, so she calls herself Patient Zero. So good luck to her.
So I'll give one quick on that, is in the spinal cord field, we meet a lot of people that go to different countries to get stem cell treatment. And in the rodents, we see nice effect, but we have no evidence yet in a clinical trial that it worked for humans. And all the high-level people I know advise against it, or really know what you're doing, because a lot of it's placebo effect, and there's no hard evidence. And I would be cautious, even though I'm a scientist and I would like enhancements for all of us. I don't think we're there yet. But if it's your choice, then fine, that's good. But be careful.
In the end, what I would love to see is whether we can use our understanding of genetics to actually pin down mechanisms that we can intervene in. So metabolism is a complicated thing. If you look at any network of metabolism, it's going to look like a giant hairball. You won't be able to make heads or tails of it. But I hope that future research can focus on, for people who are adults who really can't edit their genes with much credence yet. I would hope that we can do, we can find out ways to modify the metabolism just by introducing a regime of drugs, essentially, that can let us change the way that we work, rather than just changing the genes as the case may be.
Besides regular blood testing, what other forms of testing should we be doing on a regular basis, both from a general health perspective and also from keeping an eye on a life extension perspective?
It's a long answer. Okay, there's a long list. Starting with diet, obviously, you want to be keeping an eye on what you're putting in, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. We talked about this probably in the Blue Zone presentation, which I hope to catch later. You want to be testing a whole spectrum of things in your blood. You're going to be testing your vitamin D levels. This is coming out more and more now about most people being very deficient, especially anywhere in a sunlight deprived place like Vancouver. As we hit middle of the season's change towards winter, you definitely want to be increasing your vitamin D intake. So that's one of the big ones. You definitely want to check out your blood glucose levels, your cholesterol is becoming less important. We're now learning that cholesterol is all an indicator that you're getting enough essential fatty acids to your brain. So the more cholesterol you have is turning out to be a better thing rather than the lower cholesterol. So we're getting the opposite information that we used to get. That's one of the things you want to get checked out, but you don't want to be overly concerned if it's on the side that they were telling you before was a concern.
I have a quick question on that. Is there any truth to this like fluffy LDL cholesterol thing they talk about, or?
There seems to be a definite distinction between HDL and LDL, and that the important thing is you want to know more about your ratios in regards to the triglycerides as well. It's more important that you have a better ratio of HDL to triglycerides than it is for your LDL to be lower or your HDL to be higher. So,
But I think his question is related to the particle size.
Yeah, they're asking to measure the particle size.
My understanding is yes. We're still studying that. But yes, it's LDL by itself is one part of it. You want to go to the subfractions to know the exact, and I don't have the exact details, but the recent research definitely, all the people tell you that. I'll give a slight counter-argument, not really against them, is one thing we love in the longevity thing is good biomarkers. And I've looked into quite a bit of telomeres, not as expert like him, but there's a correlation, but it's not super strong. And then there's kind of the pros and cons, which I'm sure he'll tell us about. But we don't have good markers for longevity. There's some correlations, but not really good. And our hope now, and there was just a paper last week, is we look at everything from your blood, use the machine learning, and says, what's a predictor, and then we'll also adjust it for individualness. But right now, we don't have great predictors from, cellular level to blood level to whatever of what can we change to show that our lifestyle changes is improving lifespan. We need that, but we've been looking for that for 50 years, and we're still not quite there yet.
Just another couple quick answers, and then we need to go to the next. So just the last little piece on that is back to the importance of the regime. So you should be getting postural and gait analysis quarterly and testing your range of motion, your flexibility daily. Now, the balancing factor of that is if you take on some sort of a regime or practice, say like a martial art, you go to class 3 days a week, they're going to do 20 to 30 minutes of stretching and warm-up as part of it before you do the art. And so that just manages it. And that's the sort of thing that you can kind of take a look at and have something like that as a part of your life. And if you don't like one thing or you can't stick with it, great. Change something every 6 months, every year, every 3 years, and keep giving your body all sorts of diversity.
So with that, along those lines, one indicator that's been shown to be a good sign of life length is your ability to stand on one foot with your eyes closed.
Yes.
It seems simple, it seems silly, but the studies are showing that that has a big indicator as to how much life you have left in you. So that's something that I practice myself. So.
Yeah, so there's simple measurements that are better than a lot of our, the biological, I'm a scientist, I want these molecular things. But standing on one foot or be able to sit down, which I won't do here, is that how?
Yes.
With crossed legs. And so there's these simple, and how fast you can walk, how fast you can run is highly correlated. So these gross measurements, which are actually easy for all of us to do, so far are better predictors than our molecular ones.
Just to finish that off. Another couple of ones that you want to be checking out, your grip strength, or working on your grip strength has been the large correlation as well as your pulmonary functions. So you want to check out your lung capacity. You want to use a VO2 fitness testing machine. There's a few different ones out there in most of the gyms. You can check using calipers. You can get an idea of your body fat, and you want to be checking two more, but they're not coming back to me.
Quantify itself. Yeah, and obviously we've talked about 23andMe a couple times already today. Just curious, how many people here have done 23andMe? So we have enough here, we can start to get some good data. I just want to thank you guys all for coming up here. We'll take about a minute here. We're going to get Darren set up to speak, and we have Megan is here, and we're